First Light has had more than a decade of experience supporting Indigenous people in the criminal justice system. As part of that ongoing work, we wanted to find out exactly how many Indigenous people are currently in prison in Newfoundland and Labrador. Over the span of 5 days last November, we collected demographic data from the people in all provincial institutions in the province. We were able to survey about 72% of the total inmate population, and of those 303 participants, 131 were Indigenous.
This means that a staggering 43% of people in provincial institutions at that time were Indigenous. But as of our last census, only about 8% of the province's total adult population are. Indigenous people are overrepresented in all the province's prisons. This research is important because our criminal justice system makes decisions based on data. And with this data, we can better work together to improve conditions and outcomes for Indigenous people who are incarcerated.
The criminal justice system has a duty of care to Indigenous offenders. That means the provincial government must ensure that Indigenous people can access cultural supports while incarcerated, and that it must also take meaningful steps to strengthen discharge planning in all 5 institutions that it runs.
Before now, the last time demographic data was collected on correctional facilities in our province was in 1996, 30 years ago. It found that only 12% of the inmate population was Indigenous. There's a good reason to believe that this was an underestimate. For example, no Mi'kmaq people were recorded in that study. This points to a likely problem with the methodology used. Data collection can be very challenging with these kinds of topics. Identities are more nuanced than checking a box. And depending on how the data is collected, some people might feel the need to conceal their culture and their ancestry.
Because of these challenges, we took extra care in how we identified Indigenous participants. People could self-identify, and we also asked whether they had Indigenous ancestry. For this study, anyone with an Indigenous parent or grandparent was also counted as Indigenous.
We understand it might seem strange to consider people Indigenous who don't identify that way, but it's important to understand why some people might be reluctant to self-identify. Several participants in our study offered us explanations.
There were a number of participants who told us that their parents or grandparents had experienced residential schools or other abuses and concealed their identities to protect themselves and their children. There were participants whose parents or grandparents had converted to Christianity and no longer considered themselves Indigenous afterwards.
There are participants who felt as though their appearance was too white for their indigeneity to be accepted by others, and those who grew up disconnected from culture and felt that they couldn't be Indigenous anymore.
Having status under the Indian Act is also a complicated issue. There were several participants who didn't consider themselves Indigenous because they didn't have status.
This context is essential to understanding the full picture of Indigenous incarceration.
Compared to the Canadian average, we have a higher percentage of Indigenous people incarcerated in Newfoundland and Labrador. But this number doesn't tell the whole story. We also have a higher percentage of Indigenous people in our province relative to the average in Canada. So we need to be clear with our data.
Statistics Canada uses a metric called incarceration rate. This involves calculating roughly how many people are incarcerated compared to the number of people in the general population. We do that separately for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people and then compare the two. In our study, we found that the rate of incarceration was 8 times higher for Indigenous people compared to non-Indigenous people.
So based on our findings, we're proposing some solutions. Most importantly, we're calling on the provincial government to ensure that cultural programming is available and fully funded at each of the 5 adult prisons in the province.
96% of the Indigenous people we surveyed said that they would attend cultural programming if it were available. These services are normal in other prisons across Canada. They're mandated by the Federal Correctional and Conditional Release Act and the Provincial Correctional Services Act.
These are also services that Indigenous people who are incarcerated have been calling for to support their rehabilitation. Here's a quote from a letter we received in July of last year from one of those people.
Our institutes fully supports and allows a space for prison ministry. Indigenous culture should have the same rights. It's a part of our human rights to practice religion and culture. Here at HMP, we don't have anything, or anyone. We don't have an option, we don't have a choice. We don't have a voice to support Indigenous inmates. Nowhere to sit, or to turn to and ask for help. Nowhere to smudge, or pray to the Creator. No medicines, no elders. No Indigenous liaison worker. This needs to end.
This person is only asking for fair and equal treatment, something that any of us can easily understand. Because he feels disconnected from his culture, he has to find creative ways to maintain some form of connection. One of the ways he does this is by making dream catchers out of whatever materials might be available. The 3 rings of this dream catcher were made from materials sourced from a cereal cup, Gatorade bottle, and Pepsi bottle. The web and tails were created by using bedsheet threads as string. These were then dyed using Kool-Aid powder.
We also found in a study that over 1/3 of participants indicated they had nowhere safe to go if they were discharged that day. If no beds in emergency shelters are available, these people could find themselves homeless and at a higher risk of committing survival crime. If rehabilitation and public safety are goals of the criminal justice system, then better discharge planning is necessary. This helps everyone, including Indigenous communities.
Everyone wants a fair and safe Newfoundland and Labrador. First Light will continue to advocate for improvements to the justice system as we have been doing with our 42 calls for change. You can read more about them here, as well as our full report on Indigenous people in provincial prisons.
Thank you for watching. Please take a moment to share this video and support us in our effort towards truth and reconciliation.